Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth.
Those Jamaicans who intend to come back with crime and violence to undermine what we have been building here, let me be clear to you that this is not the Jamaica that you left 10 or 20 years ago. It is not the JCF that you left 10 or 20 years ago. You will either meet a judge or your maker if you come back to Jamaica and violate our laws and create havoc. I know that there are many who will be returning to Jamaica, coming back to lovely communities like these, rural areas like these, and they may attempt to set up gangs, get involved in scamming, and undermine the values of the communities that they return to. We will not tolerate that. Come back with a good heart and a good mind. Come back willing to work. Come back with your resources. You will be able to make life here. But don't come back here to undermine and destroy what we have built.
This is a good thing. Very good. And it shows that the world won't end just because people who fled have to go back and fix home. And you notice that the Jamaican Prime Minister specifically singled out the problem of gangs, saying that this is the main thing he was concerned about. That tells you something, because this is an issue that we have also discussed. Part of the problem with the tethers is that while many of them are cowardly liars like Candace Owens who ain't gonna bust a grape or lift a finger for nothing, others are equally cowardly, but they're quite violent too. And as a result, when they commit crimes, we get plastered with that, because the white media makes sure just to say that they're black. There's no attempt to look at their background at all. And that's the reason why delineation is so important. As we've seen with immigrants, especially if they have some sort of media profile, whenever they do something positive, they make sure to mention that they're Nigerian or Jamaican or Ghanaian. They want to make sure that the home country gets their credit, even if it's a country that they themselves never set foot in. But when it's time to talk about the Shawa posse or Haitian gangs or Nigerian scammers, suddenly they're not representing the home team anymore. They just say black. Now, before I go any further, we need to make note that we have a lot of true soldiers among us who trace their lineage to Jamaica, Africa, and all points in between. When we talk about tethers, we're not talking about them. Everybody knows who the tethers are because they're cowardly, they're liars, and they're opportunists. Now, the immigrant family among us, they know exactly how much damage that these tethers did to their home countries. And I, for one, am glad that the Prime Minister down there is making it a point to say that when these individuals come back, they won't be allowed to act the way that they've been allowed to act in the U.S. And I'm fully in favor of that. Bukele is a white supremacist adjacent, and I'm glad I don't have to live in a country that he's in charge of. I would hate to have him for a neighbor. Though it needs to be said that he responded to the out-of-control gang violence in his country by adopting a zero-tolerance policy for it. And for their sake, I sincerely hope the Jamaican Prime Minister's words are not just empty hair and bombast, because his words are going to be tested. When those gang members come back giving them a lead enema, that's going to be a tactic, but you can't make that a strategy. However, having places to imprison them can be. So is the Jamaican Prime Minister planning to do that? Is he putting anything in place for that? Because he's going to need to. And as good as this move is on his part, I hope that they'll also deal with the core issue that caused their people to flee in the first place, a broken loyalty system, and the political and racial schizophrenia of clinging to the corpse of a long-dead empire, in this case, the British Empire. Jamaica is never going to come into its own until they finally stand on their own 2 feet and sever any and all ties to the so-called crown. Either they are an independent people or they are a vassal state of some white country, but they cannot be both. It's precisely these kind of internal contradictions that have made it impossible for them to have the kind of group solidarity that they need. Jamaicans of a necessity must have pride in themselves. I'm not talking about hollow boasting, like the kind that we get from the tethers, but true pride in themselves for their accomplishments. However, pride means nothing if they don't also have trust in one another. Jamaicans began leaving in droves during the 20th century, mostly to Britain. That should have been the first sign that there was a problem. When a people abandons their land, they also are surrendering their birthright and their children's chance at an inheritance. When outsiders see people fleeing from their own home, what that says to them is this is a people who are weak, or at the very least, their land is basically undefended. That makes you into a target for anybody who wants to come along. We're seeing this in Africa playing itself out for about the umpteenth time. And not only is this bad for the home country, but it also creates problems for the people who leave. Because when people flee, they have to start all over again. And while there is something to be said for making a fresh start, you cannot establish a great civilization abroad until you first learned how to build one at home. Sooner or later, the Africans and the Caribbeans are going to have to make a stand. They can't all flee. They can't all immigrate. And that being the case, at some point, they're going to find that they can no longer escape having to do the work of building. And truth be told, if they refuse to build for themselves, then they will simply become economic and political and physical casualties of whomever comes along to knock them off. People who do believe in building. Now, of course, you're going to have more than a few people who are asking, well, why is it the Jamaican Prime Minister is simply saying we don't object to our countrymen coming home, like the people in Colombia and Venezuela do, but he's not calling them home? Well, the question is, what would he call them back to? It's precisely their broken loyalty system that's made it impossible for them to have any sort of real group economics. That's the core of the problem there. It's an economic one. But I do consider this to be a positive development that you have the Prime Minister of Jamaica who, rather than trying to object and say we don't want our citizens back, instead he's saying, fine, everybody who can get back, you're coming home, we welcome you. Just keep in mind, things are different now. And if he's going to be taking a hard line, that's good. You're going to have to get people in line and make sure that they understand that they're not going to be able to go back to the bad old days. They're not going to be allowed to turn Jamaica back into a war zone as they've done in certain areas in the United States. The entire reason you have so many tethers who try to claim that they're better than foundational Black Americans is because they feel insecure and inadequate about the fact that they had to flee from home. I've spoken about this before. When somebody has to run away from home, it creates an inferiority complex in them. So they try to compensate for that by praising the home country to the hilt as being superior in every way, even though that begs the question, if they truly believed it was superior, why did they leave? I hope that in addition to getting tough on the criminal element who made so much of Jamaica unlivable, they will also focus on getting their economics in order, and that would start with something that Dr. John Henrik Clarke talked about when he gave lectures on the Caribbean revolutions. They don't buy from other Black people, and it's not because they believe their own people's work or products is of inferior quality as much as it is about mental colonization. It's the same reason that they still bow to the descendants of the very white supremacists who made their forefathers and foremothers into slaves. Whether they want to admit it or not, the reality happens to be they have taken on the same attitude of contempt for other Jamaicans as the colonizers did. That's the biggest problem that goes along with being colonized. The oppressor puts their own mental shackles onto you and has you thinking and acting the way that they do, especially when it comes to one's own people. If there's anything that could be called the true demonic genius of the white supremacists, it's that they got the oppressed to see the world through the eyes of the oppressors. And that's a key reason why it is that even after the so-called end of colonization, all of these countries still have these problems going on anyway, because they have to a large degree taken on the mentality of the very people that they were supposed to be fighting against. And that poisons and contaminates all of their dealings, not just with each other at the individual level, but also at the group level. It affects what they see when they look in the mirror, and what they do when it comes time to interact with one another. But the Jamaican's leader is showing nerve and toughness, even if it's only rhetorical, which is a hell of a lot more than I can say for the leaders of Latin America. They've been able to put off making the kind of bold social reforms that their countries need by using illegal immigration to send their disenfranchised into exile. The corrupt ruling Blancos down there would have been overthrown ages ago if they didn't have the ability to export their dissidents northward. When they try to pretend that they are so concerned for their citizens who are being deported, that's a lie. If they cared, they would have made the changes that the people demanded a long time ago. Illegal immigration has not only been a political lifeline for these corrupt Blancos in Latin America, but it's also been an enormous revenue generator for them. As I detailed in an earlier morning briefing, these countries receive billions of dollars each from their illegals in the U.S. who send money back home. That is a torrent of free cash that they don't have to do anything to get. All they have to do is just sit there and watch this shower of money deluge them. And what have they done with all that cash? God only knows, because you can't tell by looking at their country that anything's come of it. But the attempts to try to scare or coerce or guilt or shame the U.S. into going back to an open borders sanctuary nation policy isn't going to work. and the people advocating for it are becoming downright ridiculous. You have the likes of Shakira, of all people, saying that immigrants live in constant fear in the U.S. Which immigrants is she talking about? Certainly not herself. She's not an illegal alien. And does anyone seriously think that this scrawny heifer has spent even 5 seconds around the people that she pretends to be caring about? While illegal immigration has been a catastrophic problem for the U.S., for Latin America's corrupt Blanco ruling class, it's been a solution to all of their problems. The misrulers of Latin America have spent centuries lying to their own people, their own mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, their own children. So why does anyone doubt that these exact same individuals aren't lying to the United States? If Shakira wants to stick up for people, she can start with her own country of Colombia. Afro-Colombians are treated horribly there as anything you would find in Mexico or Argentina. But white Latinas like Shakira and Sofia Vergara don't care about that and don't even mention it. What she's doing is empty virtue signaling, nothing more. And keep in mind, these are the same people who have decided they would make a culture out of attacking black people in their home countries and calling themselves attacking and trying to look down on us here. These are not victimless crimes. And that brings me back to our part in all this. We have to make sure that we keep looking out for each other, because that's what differentiates us from Tethers and Bootlicks. The Candace Owens, the Coleman Cruzes, the Cynthia Erivos, they don't care about anyone, not even their own. They gladly throw each other overboard. That's how they got in the mess that they're in. That's how they got into the U.S., by showing back in their home countries how they had no loyalty to their own people. That's why they fled. They're not about to be 10 toes down for anything. Tethers rely on white supremacy to sustain them. Sure, white power can bring them in large numbers, but the Tethers are not a community. They try to brag about being proud of coming from wherever, but that doesn't make them a community. They have divided themselves into a bunch of factions, and they're all trying to act like tribe is more important than anything, just like they did back home. It's way past time that changed. If white power hadn't spent the last 60 years hand-feeding these bigots from Latin America and the Tethers from the Caribbean, all of these loudmouths who call themselves wagging their fingers in our faces, they would have nothing. And that's what they fear. Well, the Prime Minister of Jamaica is making it very clear that he's not terrified of his citizens being repatriated. In fact, if these guys get on code, it could turn out to be the best thing that's ever happened to them. Imagine that. People who actually look at their own country and their own countrymen as being the place that they want to be. But the thing to remember is the same way that I've pointed out that the bootlicks and the shills and the Tethers, they fear black empowerment because they know that we are not going to feed them. The black grassroots isn't going to feed traitors and turncoats. Well, the same thing goes for these other countries if these people get on code. Who the hell is going to want to feed these Tethers when they come back home acting the exact same way that they did in the U.S.? You have Candace Owens running around calling herself bad-mouthing Jamaica like she tries to bad-mouth us. They wouldn't feed her, and she knows that. These clowns depend on white supremacy for every crumb of their daily bread. Well, as the great FBA filmmaker Sam Greenlee said, black people should be building their own bakeries and baking their own bread. And when black people return to those kind of practices, we will also once again put ourselves in a position to decide who eats and who doesn't eat. And speaking of eating, the Jamaican Prime Minister is threatening to have these gang members fed some lead. Well, truth be told, it's way past time that they had a zero-tolerance policy for any kind of off-code behavior. And this is also going to result in these guys acting differently, as in better towards us, because once they have to actually take on the burden of having to stand on their own 2 feet and actually take care of their own affairs, they're not going to have any patience for people who are sitting there with empty bluster. That's going to be what happens when only deeds matter and not words. We don't bear the Jamaicans or the Africans any sort of animosity, not like so many of them have borne for us when they come here, and that's because we don't have the insecurity on our shoulders. That comes from failure. It's time that these guys started getting some wins under their belts again on their own terms. So that being the case, I'm actually applauding them. I'm rooting for them. I have no interest in seeing the Jamaicans or the Africans or any other part of the diaspora fail. That's what Tethers and shills and bootlicks do. Once they have to start doing for self again and don't have the luxury of white mommy and white daddy feeding them anything, then what's going to happen is all of that divisive rhetoric is going to start to go away. Or at the very least, if they continue bragging about themselves, at least now it will finally be well earned. And that's a fundamentally healthy thing. for everybody else to see what it is that we've been doing all this time and to understand why we've been telling them haters don't build and builders don't hate. Good day and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Mouse, Nico, Scarlet Osias, FBA Queen, and Darkside Blues. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.